whichever hour it is for everybody. Welcome back. It's great to see you all. You know, we connected with everybody, I think, over the last week or two, and it does seem everybody in, you know, their own context is doing well, but it is good to see you here again today. In terms of just formalities of apologies, we do have an apology from Mark Vermouth, but he hopes to be with us tomorrow, and we have Lynn Pament, we hope, on the telephone because she has to attend the meeting, and Ross will play comments in from her as appropriate points in time. In terms of the administrative items, one thing I just wanted to highlight on that was the report on activities and outreach. As ever, I think, you know, huge amount going on, and thanks to all the members and TAs for undertaking that outreach. It really is a tremendous effort. And I think, although it can't be, you know, done on an individual basis, obviously at the moment in most cases, it's still extremely important, I think. You will have seen that we've got a new process. I think most people managed to navigate that okay. The staff are still refining that, but if there were any concerns or any problems, if you just let Leah know on that, but I think we'll give that another go in December. But that, I think, worked more smoothly from the if you like, the admin side of things. Ross, anything else then on activities or admin items we should report?
No, no other points on administrative items, Ian. Okay,
that's great. So then if we just move on then to minutes from the June meeting and the virtual check-in. Any further items on the draft minutes from the June meeting? Okay, so I'm not seeing any hands up on that, so we approve those minutes. Then if we move on to the draft minutes of the virtual check-in meeting. Oh, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just observing a little matter here on the draft minute, paragraph 3.3, instructions, paragraph 3.3.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the task force. Which task force is that? I don't know whether it was any task force appointed for the mid-period work plan or program. I'm saying the task force will review changes and provide final sign-off before publication. So I'm wondering which task force is that?
Ross, do you want to just...
Thanks, Chris, for highlighting that. There was a task force for the mid-period work program consultation, but we'll clarify to make that clear in the minutes. Thanks for that point.
Okay, thanks, Ross. Okay, then in terms of the check-in, the draft minutes of the check-in meeting, any comments on that? Okay, so we approve those. Ross, then moving into the Programme and Technical Directors report, over to you.
Thanks, Ian. And in terms of the report, I'll take it as read, but I'll highlight a couple of items to flag for members. First, there's no proposed changes this time. You'll recall in June, we had a number of changes to the various projects that we reviewed and implemented. At this time, there are no proposed changes, but we will revisit the timetable at the end of the meeting as per normal. And if there are any developments we need to reflect from this meeting, we'll action those and discuss then. I want to flag that we highlight in the report the mid-period work program roundtables that we're in the process of planning. I do have a comment from Lynn. I'll read in here for everyone. She did question that there were no European events planned, and just to note that we don't have any planned at this time, but we're happy to undertake a European event on a regional basis if we have a partner that's interested in working with us on that. There's a kind of coming together pretty quickly, so it's not purposeful oversight by any means. It's just we're working on a number of these in real time, and we just wanted to share what we've got firmed up at this point. So that's what's highlighted in the report today. I wanted to flag, for those who may not have seen it, that the academic advisory group call for academic papers went out at the beginning of September, and we're looking for abstracts on the topics noted in the call for papers by the end of September, and then we'll start our process to consider the papers that we'd like to award the grants to and have draft detailed papers developed. Again, just flagging that for information. I'd like to flag in Appendix A to the work program, we've started the enhancements to our due process reporting, and you'll see a table there that we prepare on an annual basis for the PIC, the status of application of due process, which we've started to simplify and plan to begin to include together with the work program package in these papers for the board and constituents reference point. We'll also include it on the website going forward. And I wanted to flag that at the end of the paper, we have the check-in dates, the one-day meetings that we have in between the quarterly meetings noted for 2022. I'd like to flag that for members to please hold these dates. Similar to last year, if we don't need those dates and we choose not to go ahead, we'll let you know and you can release the dates, but wanted to give lots of advance notice for 2022 on the dates we'll be looking to have the check-in meetings. And again, just to remind that we will have another discussion of the work program at the end of the meeting, but those are the main points I wanted to just flag for everybody, and happy to take any comments or questions.
Thanks, Ross. So any points members want to raise on Ross's report at this stage? Yeah, Camira, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Ross, for the update. I also consider that it will be important to conduct an European roundtable. And I only have one suggestion at the end of the, I like the table you have prepared for the, about the due process, but it would be even better if we could include the dates in which each activity took place, or at least what were the comprehensive dates. So that will be helpful as well. So thanks.
So Ross, I mean, obviously you picked up on Europe already. I mean, the challenge I think we have with Europe is obviously you've got the European Public Sector Accounting Standards project going on, so that it's slightly different to the kind of other areas of the world in terms of, you know, where we've got jurisdictions, you know, definitely directly and indirectly picking up our standards. But in the past, we have actually had very good events with the Accountancy Europe. So I think that's probably something that we should take forward. Thomas, I don't know if you want to come in on that, and then Ross, I'll go to you on Camira's other point.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I was already about to say, and I made a note for myself, that I will contact Accountancy Europe and ask for partnership in that regard as well, because I think a European roundtable would be important. And I think, Ian, we both know that the IPSASB work program is influencing the IPSAS project as well. So they are pretty interested in what's going on and what's on the agenda. So yeah, I will contact Accountancy Europe and see what we can do.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Thomas. And I think, you know, those screening reports that the IPSAS projects are going through in terms of our standards also provides useful input to us. I make regular reports back to the IPSAS working group twice a year, and we'll be doing so in early November in any case. But no, I think that's welcome. So thanks for that, Thomas. Ross, did you want to pick up on Camira's other point?
Yeah, thanks for flagging that, Camira. We had kind of gone back and forth on staff on whether we put the dates in when each part was completed or just keep it simplified with a check mark. We'll take another look at that. We're trying to keep it as simple as possible so people can kind of track where a project is and identify the current stage it's in and that it's completed the other stages. But take your point that providing the actual dates of completion might be useful information to users of the report.
Thanks, Ross. Lindy?
Thank you very much. And perhaps not to get into a big debate on the format of Annexure A, I think it is quite a good idea, but I was thinking, so we have a couple of comments and I can just send it through to staff because you might want to distinguish between exposing the CP and reviewing the comments and maybe have 2 check boxes, but we'll send that through because I'm sure you don't want to discuss the details of it now.
Thanks, Lindy. Ross, do you want to just sort of explain a little bit about the rationale for the format of the table?
Yeah, I think on that one, we do have a more detailed version of this table that shows the progression throughout each stage. And we debated whether we wanted to provide that level of detail in this report. What we're trying to communicate here is the completion of the stages. So we went with a simpler approach for that reason, because we're trying to show where we're currently working, the focus of the current stage of due process, and that the other stages are complete as per the due process requirements. So it was kind of a call between more detailed without explanation and simplistic for the work program. We do prepare an in-depth one for the PIC each year that is broken out with more granularity. But so that's kind of where we landed. Happy to take your comments, Lindy, and we'll consider them further. But you know, we had put some thought into going more detailed versus not. And you know, we're kind of thinking of this as something that people are using to track where we currently are and that we've completed stages, not how we're working through each independent stage.
Thanks, Ross. And the key with this is we're trying to make sure that we integrate the performance information or due process information, you know, in terms of what the board sees and what the PIC sees. The other thing that I think might be worth just taking a look at is also how the summary table fits with the more detailed you know, project information that we have on each of the items, and then maybe, you know, that may be the linkage that you get if we enhance that, you know, we just make a note of the previous stages in terms of the project management stage. Okay, so we'll, you know, this is very much, we're sort of feeling our way on this, so comments gratefully received. Okay, any other comments at this stage on Ross's report? Yeah, Patricia.
Thank you. I have a question. The roundtables, you approached the measurement in late AGs, but for example, the Latin American event is expected to take place after the exposed draft period. What is the objective to approach the measuring related to this? For me, it's not clear.
Ross or Dave, do you want to pick that one up?
So maybe let me make sure I understand the question. Are you asking why we're discussing the measurement EDs at the roundtables?
Yes, because the discussion you wrapped after the exposed draft period.
Ross, do you want me to come in?
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
So for our Latin America roundtable, we realized that's, I think, the day after the measurement period closes, and we've had extensive discussions with our host, and they've already had discussions or presentations on measurement. So we will not be covering measurement in our roundtable presentation for Latin America, but we will be covering measurement for the other roundtables.
Okay, Dave, thanks for that update. Yeah. As you say, we are making some variations depending on regional interest and circumstances and so on. So that's one particular adjustment we're making for Latin America. Lucy, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just comment on the status of application of due process. I think IPSAS 5, since we're done with it, should no longer be shown here because it is as of September 2021 and it was already approved in June. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Leslie. Ross.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. Again, this is to show when we've completed a stage. So once we complete a project, it will keep on this table for a quarter or two just to show it's been completed with the tick marks. And then it goes into the normal summary table that we have. So I've just left it in there for now and probably will for next time, but you're right, then it will come out of the table. It won't stay there.
Okay, good, thanks. So with that, I think we move on to the main agenda item today, which is the conceptual framework limited scope update. And we've got a number of papers there. The first couple of papers picking up on items that we discussed last time when we made decisions on. So John's bringing back the drafting on those. And then some new items. So John, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ian, and good morning, everybody. And as Ian has said, there are a number of items on the agenda today and tomorrow, and we're starting with two items that are continuations from the last meeting where we're actually actioning instructions. Now, I'm going to endeavour to share my screen and to run the thing through. Joe Spencer has very kindly agreed that Joe will step in if I hit problems, which certainly has happened in the past when I get a senior moment with screen share. However, let's kick off and start firstly with materiality. And the board sponsor and staff recommendations here are to adopt the revised wording in paragraph 3.3.2 of agenda item 3.3.1. Agenda item 3.3.1 is the draft chapter 3 of what will be ED 81. And what that does is it actions two changes which relate to amendments the ISB affected in late 2018, so shortly after they'd finalised their framework. As a result of changes to IS1 and IS8, they made changes to the framework. That's firstly adding obscuring information to the factors that can influence the judgment of users, softening the threshold for preparers determining that information is material, and then two items which were requested by members as a result of reviewing the material. So these 3 and 4 are changes which are not drawn from the ISB. Firstly, adding a sentence providing guidance on the display and disclosure of material items, and adding a further explanatory sentence on qualitative materiality. And the idea of that is that it complements a similar existing sentence on quantitative materiality. And paragraphs 3.3.2a and 3.32b in the basis of conclusions give the explanation as to why we've made these amendments. And also it picks up on a point which was made at the last meeting, that there was an assertion in the basis for conclusions that materiality judgments were primarily an audit concern. It was pointed out that that was an erroneous assertion and that it's generally management or governing bodies who are responsible for materiality assertions. So basically that sentence has been deleted. At that point, and subject to anything that Ian as board sponsor would like to add, I'm going to ask the board whether they disagree with these recommendations. Before then, just to note that I've had some comments on drafting from Scott and also Lynn, and I've agreed with Scott that I will draw on his proposed changes moving forward to the next version that we'll review, which will probably be at the October check-in. But subject to anything that Scott may want to say, I don't think that there is anything substantive. They just improve the drafting. Okay, thank you, Ian.
Thanks, John. So if you can stop screen sharing so we can see everybody.
I think I have stopped. Have I stopped screen? Yeah. Yes, I have stopped sharing now. Yeah.
That's good. So just stepping through those recommendations, the first one was on including the reference to obscuring in accordance with the ISB wording. Any objections to that one? Camira.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, John. I just have a short observation on that. I was discussing that with my technical advisor, and he made me realize that also the obscuring, in fact, could be much more related to the understandability qualitative characteristic and not that much with the materiality. And that could be, that addition could be a bit confusing or could make confusing the conceptual framework on that stage. I just wanted to share that concern with you. If that would be, if we leave the obscuring there, if that maybe it would be worth to also make some amendments to the understandability qualitative characteristic on that. Thanks.
Okay.
John, back on that. I mean, this is just, I think the obscuring point does relate to materiality because obviously you don't want too much information. And that's the point there. I don't know, can you just check whether, because what we don't want to do is keep making consequential amendments everywhere in the framework. So I think, John, if you can just pick up that point in terms of understandability.
Yes, I mean, certainly, and I should further add a point that Lindy drew to my attention, that we consider materiality as a constraint. The ISB considers materiality as an aspect of relevance. Now, I don't think that there is any particular significance to that in terms of these changes. But I just wanted to note that if you look at the ISB framework, then materiality is addressed as a paragraph under relevance rather than as an aspect of constraints on financial information. Just to note that. I certainly see Camira's point that, you know, if you have a welter of immaterial disclosures, then it is likely to undermine understandability. I suppose my reservation is similar to that you've expressed, Ian, that we're potentially expanding this beyond, you know, what the ISB has done. So I'm in two minds about that. Whether we should consider adding a sentence in understandability to the effect that you know, understandability can be undermined by immaterial disclosures. I could certainly explore that going forward.
Can you take that forward as an instruction, John? I think we do have to be careful, though. This is, you know, this is not about embellishing everywhere in the framework where we think it might be helpful. I think the question is, does it really, do we really need it elsewhere? So I think, Camira, you're not challenging inclusion here. It's just a question about elsewhere. So take that as an instruction, John. But I think that does go that we're not making changes everywhere in the framework unless they really are needed.
Yeah, just to add, Ian, that you could argue that there are other QCs that are are impacted by this factor. So I just indicated that the ISB see materiality slightly different than us as an aspect of relevance. Well, I think certainly the point that Camira has raised in the context of understandability applies equally to relevance. If you've got a large amount of irrelevant information, then it becomes difficult to see what is relevant, and that in turn impacts understandability. So potentially you've got this spreading across the entire suite of QCs, and that's the reservation.
Yeah, okay, well look, can you take it away specifically on Camira's point?
Yeah.
But I'm not looking for amendments to the other QCs as a result of this.
Yeah, fine.
Okay. So if I can go to Patricia and then Scott and then Lindy.
Thank you. My question is related to the sentence A, and the point 4A. Does the sentence establish a kind of threshold or a kind of specific rule? In my view, I think yes, because define or establish this kind of displayed, the entity needs to consider it disclosed. But I think, in my view, it's not appropriate here.
Okay,
because
come back to your comment in a minute, Camira, Patricia, because I think you're on the sentence inserted, and I just want to clear the points on adding obscuring just at this point in time. So can I just take any comments that are on the inclusion of obscuring and then come back to the additional sentence that's been inserted? Scott and then Lindy.
Yes, thank you, Ian. I just wanted to comment on Camila's point. FASAB went through a materiality. It was actually in a concept statement as well, and we really got hung up on the over-disclosure item, even though everyone was very much aware that governments tend to over-disclose as opposed to under-disclose, but we got hung up on the wording. We ultimately didn't include it. So I just wanted to pass that on as an observation to Camila's point.
Thanks, Scott. I think that's helpful in terms of that caution. Lindy.
Thank you. And it was also just on the instruction and understandability, and maybe it's not something that we need to amend in the text, but in the basis for conclusions, that we could just add and say you would have to consider all the QCs together. Because I don't think if you start talking about one aspect in the framework, you're going to have to deal with all of them, as John suggested, but maybe it's something we can include in the BCs as something that was discussed. Yeah. So. Thanks for that, Lindy. That might be quite a neat suggestion. So, John, if you can just report back on, whether we just adopt that, and then that would address, kind of most of the points raised, I think. And I see thumbs up on that, so thanks for that. Okay, so with that as the way forward on that, then there's the second point, was the softening of the threshold reasonably be expected. Anybody disagree with that? Okay, so I think we're fine with that. So then we come to the insertion of the sentence beginning where an entity judges. So we've already had Patricia expressing concern about that. Can I pick up any other comments on that sentence? So I've got a range of hands going up. Lindy, David, Camira, and then Todd. Yeah, I just didn't understand what discreetly meant, and wondered perhaps it should be separately displayed, because I couldn't come up with an example of what do we mean by discreetly. Thanks.
Thanks. I'll take a round of comments and then go back to you, John. So, David.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I agree with Lindy. The use of the word discreetly is very odd. I don't think it's the right word. I was also a bit surprised about an entity judging whether or not the item is being discreetly displayed. Surely the entity knows whether or not the item is being discreetly displayed. And I wondered whether or not the sentence could be redrafted to say, where the item and entity judges to be material is either not displayed on the face of a financial statement or not given sufficient prominence through display, the entity considers disclosure.
Thanks, David. That's helpful. I see some thumbs up on that. So take additional comments then from Camira, Todd, and Mike.
Thanks. Yes, similar to Lindy's, and I disagree with this discreetly displayed because we do not understand what is that, and also perhaps referring to a material item, because now it's the sentence is really doesn't mention the word materiality, so it's like not fitting into the text at all. So making those precisions would be helpful, or maybe providing an example. I don't know if in the conceptual framework we should include examples, but to make it clear what are we meaning here and which situations. So thanks.
Thanks, Camira. So I think probably what I'm going to suggest is actually that those members who've made interventions on this, including that initial intervention from Patricia, we take the wording away, perhaps starting off with David's suggested wording, and then make sure that that addresses the points that other members are making. Todd, and then Mike.
Thanks, Ian. And I think I had very similar concerns to those that have been expressed. So the sentence, I think, does need to be redrafted, and I had something fairly similar to David's wording that I'd come up with. So would be very supportive of looking at that. But for me, the sentence doesn't really work in this paragraph. And I think if we want to keep this idea, it would be better in a separate paragraph rather than sitting in the middle of this one, because it didn't seem to help in terms of the flow of the paragraph for me at all. And maybe if it was put separately, it would help and with the redrafting.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Mike, anything else to add?
Just to support what's being said, thank you, Chair. And I think 332 generally is just a very long paragraph and should be broken up anyway. And I've got some comments on the issues around qualitative information, so I'll come to that in the next point. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, so John, I think on that one, clearly a number of sort of issues members have picked up. So I think if we can have a look at that sentence, David has sort of provided a start point in terms of some redrafting, but there is also the question that Todd raised, and I think, echoed by Mike, that it might be better that we actually also think about cutting that paragraph or something in half or something like that. So I think if you can work with that small group of members just to make sure that we've addressed everyone's concerns and work it through in that way. If that's okay, John?
Yeah, that's fine. And clearly discreetly doesn't work, so I'll certainly delete that. I'd be very grateful if David could possibly just email me that wording, some of which I got, some of which I didn't, because I think that will be a starting point on the revision. Thank you.
Good, okay, that's good. And then we've got the final suggested additional wording. I do think this might be a case of actually one of the sort of legendary Sheila Fraser instances where actually less is more, and we might just refer to uniform thresholds and leave it at that. But I'll take any additional comments. So just revise that to specify uniform thresholds at which particular. So I'll put that proposal out there and then just see whether anybody wants to come in on that, because I think we're over elaborating and getting ourselves into problems by the additional word. Lindy.
Thank you. I guess the only comment I have is if you use threshold, it implies a monetary value. And when you talk about qualitative aspects, there's no real monetary. So I don't know if you can say thresholds or criteria or something like that.
Okay, thanks, Lindy, for the alternate suggestion. So I think, John, if you can just have a look at that, because I think thresholds was causing concern for exactly the reason that you expressed there, Lindy. Okay, so we go with that shorter piece of drafting. Okay.
Noted, thank you.
Mike and Scott.
Thanks, Chair. So I was, are we on to item 4 on the discussion around qualitative versus quantitative?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So thank you. And maybe it's just because we've, in 332, we've referred to GPFRs rather than to GPFSs. And GPFRs clearly encompass service delivery achievements rather than just financial achievements. And if that was deliberate, that's okay, because I was worried about using the word consequently, and it just didn't work for me in 332, because I wasn't sure how consequently led to a change needed because of discussion around GPFR. So if that was deliberate, then I suppose I'm okay. But if it's referring to GPFSs, which I thought was what we needed to deal with in terms of materiality, then I'm not sure I understand what we've done in 332.
Okay, John, if you can have a look at that. I mean, Mike, that is original drafting. It's not something that John's added.
Yeah, could I just add, Ian, that chapter 3 is a chapter which is broad in its scope. It deals with GPFRs rather than just financial statements. Now, that was a decision which was made when the framework was being developed and confirmed when it was finalized. It's not something that within the scope of this project we're re-examining. So that has made drafting slightly tricky, because obviously the ISB's amendments are in the context of financial statements.
Yeah.
Their scope is narrower than ours in this chapter.
Mm.
Okay, so just have a look at that, you know, whether it is consequently or not.
Yeah.
Scott.
Yeah, thank you. I raised my hand in response to Lindy's comment. In the audit literature, instead of threshold, we used the word characteristics, which helps with the qualitative side of that. So just a way forward, maybe.
Thanks, Scott. That may well be helpful. So, yeah, okay. So if we propose that, then is the way forward. And John, if you can just test that in terms of the wording. Renee, and then I'm going to move us on, because we do need to start making progress on other items. Renee?
Yes, thank you. In reviewing the BCs, I sent a comment to John about BC 332C. I know the topic of this paper is A and B, BC A and B, but in C, we picked up on the fact that we refer to expenditures in a context of regularity, and it's more than expenditures. It could be any types of transactions that would require compliance with legislation or laws. So it's just a comment to edit the paragraph to broaden the statement to just say that it's transactions recorded as opposed to just expenditures. So it's an easy one.
Okay, thanks for that.
Yeah, no, I've noted that, and the proposal is that we delete expenditure in that paragraph and replace it with transactions, reflecting the point that Lynn has made, that regularity statements or assertions are not restricted to expenditure.
Okay, thanks. Right, okay, so John, move us on.
Right. The next issue is prudence. And in this slide, I've highlighted the issues that are considered in paragraphs 4 to 10 of agenda item 3.2.2. And the first point, instruction, just to track back a little bit, the instruction at the June meeting was to go away and consider the case for any changes from the ISB paragraphs from which these paragraphs are drawn. The view being that unless there's a reasonably strong public sector reason, we should retain the ISB's wording suitably modified. Now, the first issue is that we deleted...
Could you put your slide up, please?
Oh, sorry, here it is, my fault. Yeah, so these are the issues which are considered in paragraphs 4 to 10. The first one is that we didn't include a sentence in the ISB framework on asymmetry not being a QC. And the reason for that is that we felt that introducing a discussion on asymmetry as a QC, even in a single sentence, is counterproductive in a public sector context. You know, we're not proposing that either cautious or asymmetrical prudence should be a QC, so why even suggest that we are? So this is a case where we have deleted a sentence which is in the ISB's framework. Ian, it might be an idea if I stop there perhaps and take any views on that.
Yes, thanks, John. I'm not seeing any hands raised on that, so I think members are content with that.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, B and C are areas where board members gave comments that they didn't like some of the wording in the ISB's framework. And the first sentence was the final sentence of paragraph 3.14a. And the view was that the word misstatements is over strong and that it should be deleted. Now, the board sponsor and I took the view that the statement is factually correct, that if you make changes in one reporting period, then they are going to have follow-on changes in subsequent reporting periods leading to misstatements. So in that respect, we could not see that there was any public sector reason for change. So the view is that we should retain that final sentence of paragraph 3.14a.
Okay, so if you can take the slide down, John.
Yep.
Liz wants to come in on that. Leslie, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree to retain that last sentence, but I have some questions on it because I think the misstatements do not only lead to overstatement or understatement of the revenue or expenses in future reporting periods, but since it is predicated that assets and liabilities may also be overstated or understated. So I think that applies also to assets, liabilities, and equity in future reporting periods, not only for the revenue and expenses, as balances of these accounts are carried forward to ensuing reporting period, unless of course such overstatements or understatements are adjusted or are corrected. So I suggest that we also include misstatements, such misstatements can lead to the overstatement or understatement of assets, assets, liabilities, equity, revenue, or expenses in future reporting periods. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. I mean, I think it's an example of something that is not definitive. It's can and such are both qualifying statements. So it's not intended to be exhaustive. And I think if we start to make it exhaustive, then we get into problems by being exhaustive. So that's why it is, you know, it deliberately encompasses other forms, and there isn't a public sector reason not, you know, to make a change. So I think if you're okay with it, I think we just leave it as permissive rather than trying to be, you know, totally totally exhaustive. Mike?
Thanks, Chair. I support what John's doing, and so I support entirely what he's on about. I just had a question in 314A, and maybe it's just my use of English language, but if we're saying new prudence is about the exercise of caution, then why do we use the word means in the next sentence? The exercise of prudent means, I would have thought it should be the exercise of prudence is aimed at ensuring that assets are not overstated rather than it means that they're not.
John, any comments on that?
Yeah, I certainly see Mike's point on that. And, you know, you could extend that by saying that prudence and caution actually mean the same thing. What I would say is that this is drawn from the ISB's wording. So it's a question of whether we want to modify that wording along the lines that Mike suggested.
I think
sorry, Ian.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think on this one, we have to be very, very, very careful because this caused a huge amount of debate and discussion earlier on. And I think unless there is a real fatal flaw on this one, for that reason, you know, we should not be varying from the ISB's wording. In many cases, that wouldn't be the case, but this has taken an inordinate amount of time on this wording in the ISB's case, and there isn't a public sector reason to be different that I can see on this. So I would strongly recommend we don't start tinkering with the wording, even if there are preferences. The question is there a fatal flaw in this? Because I think if not, we should stick with the ISB's wording and be very deliberate about that.
If I could just add to that, Ian, I mean, I think if you do start sort of, you know, making changes to one sentence, potentially you can start making changes to virtually every sentence in the two paragraphs. So, you know, I think the issue is if we were starting with a clean slate sheet of paper, we may not have ended up here, but the risks of departing from what is here probably outweigh any benefits of more felicitous drafting. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Adrian?
Yeah, thank you, Ian. I'm not very comfortable with the wording of 314B that is that appears in the analysis. Well, I think we're touching the very limits of the conceptual discussion there. The first sentence, exercise of prudence, blah blah, etc., down to expenses, creates more confusion on the issue than it adds to the understanding of it. The issue of asymmetry is, I would say, it's superfectory. It's something that is not really needed. But anyway, if we decide to as ISB to have sentences on asymmetry, maybe the last sentence, particular standards may contain, is far sufficient to understand the problem that is the problem of asymmetry. I don't think the first sentence really I read it again and again to understand its meaning, what's the meaning of that. And in the end, I realized that, well, okay, it's sufficient to inform the readers that in some instances, particular standards may contain asymmetric requirements. for the reason that is developed in the end of the sentence. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. I mean, I can see your point, and I think this was really why John and I were recommending not including a lot of material and asymmetric symmetry. The point, though, is this caused a lot of heartache, you know, when ISB did this, and I suspect that some of the things that people are picking up on, and this may be where you're coming from, you know, is a result of the compromises that had to be achieved over some very hard fought wording. And when you look at the, you know, the responses that the ISB had on this, it became incredibly political. So I think, you know, unless there is, okay, maybe is a concern for you, but I would really strongly recommend we do not vary from the wording on this. You know, the other reason why I say that is because if we start to do that, if there is any chink on this, then this, I know, will cause problems in the IPSASB debate, because this was very, very hard fought over there. And I'm just really wary of us opening any you know, scope up for, you know, a deviation from the ISB on that. Thomas, you wanted to come in, I suspect, on from that direction, having been in many of the meetings I have.
Definitely, and I cannot support you more, because I think especially in the European discussion, and Hervé, perhaps this is, you need some national accounting understanding to kind of understand this sentence. A German reader would perfectly understand this sentence, because Germany in the IPSASB discussion is fighting like hell for the so-called imparity principle, which means apply more prudence in a kind of recognition and measurement of assets and revenues than for liabilities and expenses. And I think, especially in that context, it is absolutely helpful and necessary to leave this sentence, so to kind of allow the IPSASB discussion to refer to that and to say we are in the direct link ISB, IPSASB, IPSAS, following the same philosophy and principles.
Thanks, Thomas, for that background, and I think it probably comes better from you expressing it, given that you understand that German context. So, Adrian, I think if that's okay with you, for those reasons, I think it is better if we leave this wording.
Fine. Yep.
Okay.
Take your point.
Yeah. But I think it just underlines the political nature of the discussion here. Okay, so if members are okay, I suggest we agree to bring the wording in that John suggested.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks to all the members.
Okay, John, move us on.
Sorry, Joe's taken over sharing the screen. So can we move on, Joe? Yeah, the next agenda item is...
Sorry, John, I just want to, I think just go back a slide, Joe, please.
Can you go back? Yeah.
So we had that final issue that I just wanted to make sure that we headed down, but I think, you know, it's the same reason that we want to leave it. I just want to make sure that we are happy on that.
Just to note that this was a point raised by Mark Vermouth, suggesting that the first sentence of paragraph 3.14b, which Hervé has already alluded to, is insufficiently strong.
So as it said on the... Sorry, I should have followed that. So I think we're there on that. Okay, so we agree with the wording. Right, okay, move us on to unit of account then.
Yeah. The background to this is that currently the framework doesn't include any material on unit of account. One of the reasons for that was standards level development at the time we were finalising the framework, where it was felt that including material on unit of account would potentially cause difficulties, particularly in the social benefits areas. What we're now proposing is that we include a subsection on unit of account drawn from the IASB's 2018 framework, and ask the board to approve the drafting in paragraphs 5.26a onwards. So Ian, over back to you.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. So if I can take comments on this, and I think firstly, if I can just ensure no member disagrees with including unit of account material, and then we'll walk through drafting. Lisvi, are you okay with the inclusion of units of account?
Yes, Chair, but I just want to suggest that in paragraph 5.26a, we include present obligation in the phrase group of obligations, just to be consistent. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Lucy. Patricia, you want to come in?
And thank you. I agree with the inclusion of the unit of account. But I think some paragraphs need to be redrafted because it's not aligned with conceptual IPSASB conceptual framework, or consider the difference between IASB conceptual framework and IPSASB conceptual framework. Specifically about the use of the terms item and right. It's so important here because for IAS conceptual framework, resource is a right, and for the IPSASB conceptual framework, resource is an item. Then in this paragraph, sometimes sometimes the word item and rights are used together, but it's an item has different meanings in some paragraphs. My question, my question is maybe we should consider modify item for rights in IPSASB conceptual framework. It's my first point. And then I have another consideration about the specific paragraph because, for example, when I say about the interdependence cash flows and I include the word potential service, I need to think about the interdependence potential service. And it's not only to include the word, but think in the public sector, the specificity of public sector. I'm not sure if now I would point the specific comments, but I think these 2 points is the my main concern here.
Thanks, Patricia. So I think you raise a good point in terms of items and rights, and I suspect other members may have a concern there. So I think I'll take other comments, but I think in terms of your concerns on the other specific pieces of drafting, Patricia, what I think is if you can pass those to John to have a look at and to deal with those bilaterally, I think your concern is, has he made it sufficiently public sector specific and entirely consistent? So thanks for that. So John, if you can liaise with Patricia on the specific drafting concerns. So I go to Chris, then Mike, then Camira, then Todd.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is just for my education. I'm looking at the paragraph 4 on the analysis, the definition of unit of account to mean that is a group of right and obligation to which recognition criteria and management concepts apply. Management concepts, just for my education.
Thanks, Chris. John, back on that.
Basically, I think it relates to it also relates to presentation and measurement. The way in which groups of rights, obligations, and groups of rights and obligations are managed is one of the factors that you will take into account in determining the unit of account.
Chris, does that help?
I don't understand.
Well,
I'm talking about management concepts in the definition of unit of account.
So I think the idea is if there are similar characteristics and measurement is picked up there, that would enable you to look at things in one unit, as opposed to different measurement techniques, for example, would mean different units of account, I think is the concept.
Right. Sorry, can I come in here and apology because I've used the wrong word. It should be measurement.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So basically, you're quite right to challenge that. I'll ensure that that's changed going forward. So you could also argue that unit of account relates to presentation as well as recognition of measurement. Okay.
Okay, thanks. So
apologies to the board for that.
Okay, let's go on to Mike, Camira, Todd, and then David. So Mike first.
Thank you, Chair, and I support including unit of account in our commentary somewhere. So I agree with what John's trying to do again. I had 3 comments. I do agree with Patricia. I try to find wherever we refer in 526 to rights and obligations or items, and it seems to be sometimes we refer to rights and sometimes we refer to items and sometimes not both. So I think John just needs to go through and make sure we've been consistent. So 526G, for example, we only refer to rights, and I'm not sure how items would be useful there. So I haven't got, not helping you, John, but I think we just need to be consistent because I agree rights are really important in our framework. I then had a question, John, at this end on 526E, which talks about the concepts of understandability, timeliness, comparability, and verifiability. I think those concepts are right, but I couldn't work out why timeliness was there. I didn't think timeliness had anything to do with the unit of account. So maybe just think about that, John.
Yeah.
And my last point, I've now forgotten. I'll come back to it, Chair.
Okay.
Thanks. So I'll take comments from other members. So go to Camira next, then Todd, then Dave.
Thanks, Chair. I just have a couple of comments in relation to, I agree also to including this section on unit of account. I was just wondering why in the paper we were mentioning that it would unbalance the whole chapter, maybe because it's too long in comparison to others. So that was just one clarification question. In that case, I agree that this section is a bit too long. And then I have specific comments on paragraph 526G, where we have a sentence that is, for example, where a binding arrangement has been entered into, but neither party has performed any of its obligations. So this example could be, I know that we were replacing the word executory contracts with binding arrangement, but the example there could be a bit confusing because maybe we think, okay, if there is a binding arrangement and no one has performed, are we suggesting that we need to recognize something in memorandum items, or it was a bit confusing, this example there. And then in the paragraph 526H, when we are mentioning that treating a set of items, rights, and personal obligations as a single unit of accounts differs from offsetting assets and liabilities. If we can explain how, because then it's just like, okay, we are explaining that, but not explaining more on how, and next paragraphs are not related on that. So those are my suggestions. Thanks.
Thanks, Camilla. John, do you want to pick those points up?
Yeah, firstly, the use of items stems from the description of his...
Can we not go into items, John? I think there's a general point on that we're going to
All right.
need to look at. So I think if members can take it that there is a need to examine items versus rights, both in terms of whether we continue using two separate terms, and then consequent on that recommendation, reviewing the drafting. So I think if we take that one as read, so I'm just looking for incremental comments.
I mean, on the QCs, the reason that I've added a paragraph on the QCs is, as the paper says, because our framework doesn't distinguish fundamental and enhancing QCs. So that's one question. The ISB focuses on relevance and fatal representation. So there's a question as to whether we need another paragraph looking at the other QCs. And it's been put in there simply to really reflect the fact that we don't have a hierarchy. On timeliness, I agree that the connection is a little bit tenuous. However, the argument would be that dependent on the approaches you make on units of account could have an impact on timeliness, i.e. the more you disaggregate items, the likelihood is that that's going to take longer and may adversely affect the timeliness of the financial statements. But certainly, I'd be happy to delete timeliness. And the further question is whether, in fact, we do need a paragraph on the other QCs at all.
I'm wondering, John, whether the way through on that would be that actually comes in as it feels like more basis for conclusions material rather than actually a need to include it. So I'd suggest that we move that to basis for conclusions, which would also address, previous concerns and for example, around length.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly I'm happy to go down that route. So delete that particular paragraph.
So, yeah, and then
offset it. Is that okay to move on, Ian?
Yeah, just the other point, Camilla, you picked up on was that insertion of, for example, where a binding arrangement has been entered into. The origin on that one was that it picks up part of the executory contract definition, but not all of it. So that addresses the situation that we've identified in revenue, where you have both halves equally unperformed, i.e. at the start, at the point you go in. So it gives us a hook to hang that on without including executory contracts, which is the example in the ISB's literature.
Yeah.
But I think what you're saying is there might be a need just a little bit of further explanation or something like that on that. So if we can have a look at that, take that away and have a look at that, John.
Yeah, certainly. And I think the final point was offsetting. And the point here is that offsetting can relate to different units of account. So what this is saying is that this doesn't give carte blanche for general offsetting, and the principle is that offsetting should not be permitted unless there are requirements in particular standards which allow it. So that is the purpose of paragraph 5.26H.
Camilla, did you want to, is that okay then in terms of the points you'd raised?
Yes, yes. It's just if John could add that explanation of shorter in that paragraph, it would be very helpful to understand the difference. Yeah.
So, John,
Okay.
whether we include that anything in the paragraph or whether it comes in the basis for conclusions. Okay.
Yeah, I think probably if the starting point would be the basis for conclusions, I'll look at that and make the point that Camira has identified.
Okay, thanks for that. So go to Todd next.
Thanks, Ian, and I just wanted to make comments on a couple of paragraphs. The first one, 5.26a, very supportive of the comments that Patricia made in terms of the word items or groups of items, and I think this is something that we really need to look at quite seriously. The IASB and its framework doesn't talk about items. That's very much focused on rights, and I think in their basis for conclusions they set out a good explanation in their basis for conclusions around why they use the term rights rather than referring to items or sort of assets separately. So I would very much support us looking at that and perhaps moving to the rights type language that's sitting in the IASB framework. If you do read through those basis for conclusions, I think they would resonate for the public sector as well. So that was my first comment. And like others, paragraph 5.26e just did not work for me. And, you know, we're picking up something that has originated from the IASB framework, where they have fundamental and enhancing characteristics, and paragraph 5.26d very much focuses on the fundamental characteristics of relevance and faithful representation in the IASB framework. And it makes sense what's there. I think for our framework, we either have to put in a more fulsome paragraph 5.26e or do away with it, in my view. And I think from the earlier discussion, the suggestion was to actually remove 5.26e and deal with it in the basis for conclusions, and that would probably be the better way to go from my perspective. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Todd. So yes, I think 5.26e will go to basis for conclusions, as a number of members have had concerns about that. That's the better place for that to be. David.
Well, I don't want to pick up 5.26e again, really, but I agree that it doesn't help there. And I have got a suggestion that you could actually change 5.26d to just refer to the qualitative characteristics rather than the two that are emphasized, but I can send that wording through to John to see if that helps. My other question was, do we really need, if we're concerned about length, do we really need 5.26i? Because what's in that paragraph can be inferred from earlier paragraphs.
Thanks, David. John, I think take that one away, because again, that's come over from ISB, and I think the question is well made. Do we need it? But there must have been a reason why it was included.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Mike.
well, just to say, Ian, that those are, as you say, drawn directly from the ISB framework. Now, in our framework, we generally try to reduce the number of examples that we give. So if we did want to truncate the material, then probably this is the paragraph to do that. But I'll look at that.
You can have a look at that and come back with a recommendation on that. Mike, then Lindy, then Listy, and then Adrian.
Thanks, Jess. I remembered what I wanted to talk about. It was in 5.26d for donkey, and I suppose I was trying to understand in particular A3, where we're talking about economic characteristics, and A4, where we talk about operational activities, and in making sure we get the reference to future cash flows or future cash inflows or outflows and future inflows or outflows of service potential. And I wasn't sure whether that was deliberately drafted that way. I was trying to add in to A3 reference to outflows or inflows of service potential, but that didn't work for me. So is that what 4 is trying to do, because we refer to operational activities?
They're two separate points, although they are related. In 3, I've added service potential because the economic characteristics and risk, are, if we're talking about the public sector, they're likely to have implications for service potential in cases rather than just in net cash flows.
I don't have an answer for you, John, but I think it just needs to be looked at because it seems wordy and not public sector specific to me.
Right. I mean, what I could do is simply add something like such as and talk about the prospects for service potential. So I can look at that. The wording in paragraph A4, I've used operational activities rather than business activities, which was the wording in the ISB's original drafting, are used together in the business activities. And that's simply to reflect the fact that we don't generally use the term business activities in our literature. An example of that being the standard on public sector combinations. So I just felt that operational activities work better in a public sector context.
Thanks for the explanation, John. So I'll go to Lindy next, and then Lucy, and then Adrian.
Thank you very much. Maybe it's just drafting, but the paragraphs that we have included, we refer to binding arrangement. And I think we've seen in other meetings is a table with different ways in which it's defined in the literature. I was thinking that perhaps if we look at how the term we've used in other chapters to the conceptual framework on elements, we just talk about arrangements. So maybe we can just use a more neutral term to talk about arrangements, unless we want to talk about specific binding arrangements here, so we don't cause confusion. Thanks.
Yeah, noted.
Thanks, Lindy. Lucy, and then Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask if the deletion of the phrase retained component in paragraph 5.26, sorry, 5.26C was intentional or was just it was just missed, because it was taken from paragraph 4.50 of the IASB framework. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. John, back on that.
Yeah, I think I've taken transferred as a result of the use of transfers in the first line. Certainly the drafting in the parent paragraph is retained. So I'll look at that. I can't see any specific public sector reason why we shouldn't use retained. So the proposal would be that it would read, if an entity transfers part of an asset or part of a liability, the unit of account may change at that time so that the retained component becomes separate units of account.
Okay. John. Okay, so I think that would be the point.
So I'll action that for October.
Thanks. Adrian.
Thanks, yeah. Well, I definitely support the introduction of that subsection on the unit of account. However, I think that as we I believe we do in general, we're going very far down on the road to, I mean, rules or application aspects of the concepts. This is a conceptual framework, and I believe we could shorten it quite dramatically. And if we want to trim the wording, I would support the deletion of 26I, and I would also support the deletion of 26E. Why is that? Because I do understand the need to reflect that there is no hierarchy among the QCs, but couldn't we say that on the QCs paragraph? I mean, we just need to say in the conceptual framework that QCs are attributes, comma, with no hierarchy among them, comma, that make information useful to users. And I don't believe that this sentence, as worded, really explains that there is no hierarchy. It just says, okay, go back to other QCs or go back to QCs. But I think, okay, this is 3 lines that for me are not really essential. Because obviously, if we want to say that, we should say that as a cover mentioned somewhere, and the somewhere is in the QC paragraphs at the beginning of the conceptual framework. It would be stronger, I would say. That's just it.
Okay, Chair, could I just ask clarification from Hervé Adrien? We're talking here about 5.26E, not 5.26D. Is that right? There.
Yeah, E. Yes, the E.
E. Yeah, I think we've agreed on that we'll probably consider the need for it, and if there is a need, we would put it in the basis for conclusions. So yes, probably that would be deleted from the core text. And similarly, we've had the proposal also that you have identified that we delete 5.26I, and that would certainly reduce the volume of material. So thank you for both those suggestions.
Okay, so I mean, summarising where we've got to, I think all the members who've spoken have agreed that we should bring material on unit of account in. I think there are some general concerns about length on this, and as we've just summarised, 5.26E caused problems to a number of members. So we should certainly look at, we should certainly move that into the BCs if we do indeed need that. David also suggested, linked to that, that there is some possible tweak to the drafting in 5.26D that may help on that. Similarly, we've had questions about 5.26I and that continuing to be retained in the section. Now, I think in looking at that, we need to take a step back and then say, from a public sector perspective, where do we think that we are going to need to use this material? Because it is a very important piece of text in the framework. You know, and for example, there may well be areas, for example, in terms of capital grants, where we want to consider its potential application. So I think in terms of thinking about 5.26I continuing, we should look at, you know, are there specific areas where that may be useful, in which case that argues for retention, or it may be that, as David says, it's already catered for by other drafting. So I think all of those need to be looked at. The specific issue that has been raised by a number of members was this issue about the fact that we use the term items in terms of talking about resources, whereas the ISB uses the term rights. On that, I think there's a specific piece of work that we need to have a look at as to whether we bring that in or not. You know, and I think there is a question there about what's the question that we're trying to fix. We shouldn't necessarily, in this case, be the same as the ISB if there's a good reason for retaining the term item. Equally, I think we also need to be careful not to have unintended consequences if we move to just using rights. So I think there is a piece of work that's required to advise on whether we move forward on that or not, bearing in mind this is a limited scope update and whether it's actually raised problems in practice or not. Then I think there are a number of other pieces of drafting, John, where members have already made suggestions which will fix particular issues so that you can action those. And then I think there are some other areas where members have questioned approaches to drafting in particular sections. So I think on those queries, not just the wording substitution, rather than the wording substitutions, if you can work with a small group of those members who have raised concerns, just to get the drafting of the overall section right.
Yeah.
Is that a reasonable summary of the various different points that have been raised by members?
Ian, could I just clarify how we're going to deal with this term item, which isn't really specific to units of account? It relates to the description of a resource in paragraph 5.7. Now we're going to be looking at that in the context of service potential slightly later, but obviously there's a risk that we spend an inordinate amount of time on this. But just to say that the reason why I've included item in the unit of account section, albeit arguably inconsistently, is because the IPSASB framework describes a resource as an item and then goes on to talk about rights. So the IPSASB framework distinguishes resources where the resource is drawn directly from the asset from cases where the resources are drawn from rights to the asset.
Yeah, thanks, John. I understand that it is picked up elsewhere. That's why I've asked you to do it as a discrete piece of work. Yes, it would relate into the item. And I don't want to debate that further here. I think there's a particular piece of work that's required. And yes, it will bridge between the drafting here and whether we change the draft, change any of the material in terms of the definition of resource in that part of the chapter. So I think if we can make it that the two are joined together and that's one piece of work on that. Mike, I don't want to debate item versus right at this stage. So is it another point that you want to bring up?
I agree with you. I don't want to do it, but I think if you're asking John to have another look at it, he should also look at BC 430 and 431 in the next agenda item where the same issue comes up.
Okay, well, look, I think this is, we just wrap all of this up. It's one issue. So wherever there are consequentials, the point is either we make a change or we don't. And I think that's the piece of advice that we need. I don't think we should presuppose that we should make a change, but there will then be consequentials from the advice that's received, and it will be picked up wherever that there are impacts. Okay, so I'd just like to conclude the debate then on that item and move us on to the linked point on executory contracts, and then we'll take a break after that.
Yeah, we're taking these two issues together. What I've done on paragraphs 15 to 20 of agenda item 3.2.4 is to give what the board sponsor Ian and I felt were the options. And there are three options. First one is the minimalist one, where we take what the ISB's drafted and only make change for public sector terminology. The second one is to argue that the paragraphs in the ISB framework only apply to clearly commercial contracts. Or the third option is to remain silent on executory contracts on the basis that, firstly, This is consistent with the reservations that the board raised about the use of the term executory contracts in the context of revenue at the April meeting. And secondly, that all the principles are stated in the section on unit of account quite adequately, and that there's therefore no reason for a separate section. Now, acknowledging that the term executory contract is defined in IPSASB 19, board sponsor and staff support option C. So we are against including a subsection on executory contracts or binding arrangements in Chapter 5. At that point, I, through Ian, ask the board whether they agree with that recommendation.
Thanks, John. So open up for discussion on their recommendation. Thomas.
Yeah, just to highlight and remind the board that the CAG discussed on that in its December meeting 2019 in Abu Dhabi, and I think executory contracts was explicitly mentioned as one aspect to be discussed. So first of all, I'm thankful that you're looking at it, but I think people kind of, at least in the CAG discussion, were of the opinion that it kind of probably needed to be discussed and mentioned. So perhaps you can look at that from that point.
Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, I mean, I think it is important that we have this discussion. So thanks for that. Patricia.
Thank you. I thought about the some arguments in the text in the paper about the executory contract. The first, equal exchange of resources. And in my view, not in my interpretation, in the IPSASB CF conceptual framework about executory contract, equal is an attribute of the fulfillment of the obligations and not for exchange of resources. In accordance with BC 417 of ISB conceptual framework, the guidance supported the definition of an asset and a liability is equally suitable for reciprocal exchange transactions and non-reciprocal transactions. In both the cases, the start point is to identify the rights and obligation right from the transactions. Because this, I think, the argument, it's not justify depart from the executory contract, the guidance about the executory contract. The second point is about the third-party beneficiary. In a commercial contract, they may be a third party. For example, in the context of sustainability and or corporate social responsibility, the wider society may be the beneficiary of a contract in which two private sector entities are the parts. The ISB conceptual framework does not establish different guidance for this. It's the same. The same occur when the happens when the one part is a governmental entity and another part is a private sector entity, because the governmental entity can contract the private sector to handle, for example, medical services for third party. And the ISB conceptual framework is silent about this. Because this, I think, it's not an exception, not justified to depart from the the executory contract. The third point is about the event, like fulfill the eligible expenditure or perform some specific activities. According to the guidance and the BCs, the events are, sorry, one moment. Can I consult my notes here? The events are necessary to recognition of another assets or another liabilities when the executor, when the contract is not executory. It's not specific about the assets or obligation of executory contract, but another asset or another liability when one part fulfills the terms of the contract. And the last argument is about the complexity. The complexity is related with the by the arrangement and not if it's in commercial or non-commercial terms. For example, it's easy to verify the fulfillment of our arrangement with the term is about eligible expenditure than if the term is about the quality of service handling. Because this, I disagree with the recommendation, and I vote for the option A.
Okay. Thank you, Patricia. John, do you have any observations? I mean, I think one caution I would make, though, Patricia, is this is our framework. So we're using things that we need. We don't have to justify an exclusion if we don't feel that that concept applies. So, John, if you can pick it up on that basis.
Well, I think the view is, as I previously said, that all the principles are in the unit of account section, so that a section on executory contracts is not really necessary. And, you know, there are reservations about the use of the term in the public sector, and those surfaced in April, as I said. And there are also, I think, concerns about how this is going to operate in areas that Patricia's noted, where the ultimate beneficiary of an arrangement is not one of the counterparties, but is a third party. So if we start getting into all that, I think we start getting into an awful lot of complexity. And there is not unanimity of whether, when a contract is signed, that you do get, you know, there are assets and liabilities of the counterparties which arise at that point. Some argue that assets and liabilities only arise when there is performance, and that prior to that, any rights and obligations don't have substance. And you can argue that that is the case for intergovernmental transfers. Now, it's questionable, but it opens really a lot of debate, which in my view is unnecessary. So I think I'd probably leave it there and say again that all the principles are there in unit of account.
So I just want to take Camira's comment, and then I'm going to take a break at this stage.
Okay, thanks, Chair, and thanks, John. I also support Patricia's point. I will also go for option A. Perhaps not including a complete subsection dedicated on that, but maybe making clearer those principles in the section of unit of accounts could also be an option, because I think that could be relevant for the public sector, and perhaps we could include an SMC on that to see if we should continue using sector contracts or define another term, or just be silent on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Camilla. So I think basically the way forward on this, John, is actually, I think we need to take the concerns that Patricia has expressed, and I think, as Camilla has suggested, really what we should try and do is see if those are actually addressed through the drafting of the unit of account section, because I think for the reasons that you've expressed, we could get into a lot of problems from a public sector perspective by trying to bring in what essentially is a rule in the ISB's framework, not a principle. It's actually, when you look at the wording, it's a rule, not a principle. So I think if we can get to it through unit of account and make sure that the issues that Patricia has expressed are dealt with through that approach, that seems to be probably the best way forward. So I'm going to take a final comment from Lindy, and then we're going to break.
Yeah, so thanks. And maybe it would be useful to see that drafting or the thinking, because we do have this notion in our literature, in leases and financial instruments, you know, and we are incorporating that in our ED 70. So I was just wondering that it might be important to have it as a mention, whatever we call it, but I do think it's already in our literature and we are applying the concept. So I didn't see exactly why it shouldn't be included, but perhaps just seeing what that explanation will be might help. Thanks.
Okay. I mean, we do have it at standards level, but I think it's questionable as to whether it's actually used in practice, because it's very specific. When you look at the definition, it is two circumstances where it would apply. One is equally unperformed and one is equally partially performed. So it really is a question as to whether it's actually necessary or not. So John, I think if you can take that action that we need to have a look at the unit of accounts and see whether in the way that we've tried to, whether we can reinforce that, or whether there is a clear argument that we have to have it in the framework, bearing in mind that you know, we do have it at standards level in IPSAS 19.
Yeah. If I could just ask if it's possible if Patricia could forward those points that Patricia raised, that would be very helpful.
Thanks very much, John.
Okay.
And thanks, Patricia. So if you can forward those concerns, and Camilla, if you've got any other concerns, then we'll see whether those can actually, so the default would be that we address those through units of accounts rather than necessarily bringing into the framework, but that may make the argument the other way in doing that exercise. Okay, so with that, I'm going to break us at that point in time. Todd, if it's any further points on this, I think if we can take those offline, because I think we need to break at this point. I'm going to break us until, well, it's 12:42 by my time, so if we can go till 12:55 or 5 to whichever hour it is that you have. And then we're going to move into the section on service potential. Okay, thanks everyone.
1 minute.
Okay, so welcome back, everyone. So, John, take us into the next part of the session, which is on service potential.
This was an issue that we discussed at some length at the last meeting, and there was a certain amount of skepticism about the approach that had been recommended, which was to replace the term capacity with ability. Just briefly, the reasons for that are that capacity is used in the measurement ED with a slightly different meaning than is used in the framework. As I think David Watkins said at the last meeting, the way in which capacity is used in the measurement project brings into play notions of resource, volume, availability, and sufficiency, whereas in the framework, it's just used straightforwardly in using the terms ability or capability. So it has a narrower meaning in the framework. Because of the views of the board, if you recall, Scott put forward a view that capability might be a viable alternative to ability, and that's what we've done. So in paragraph 5.8 of agenda item 3.3.2, we're proposing that the description of service potential in paragraph 5.8 of the framework is changed to service potential is the capability to provide services. And we've made certain other changes to paragraph 5.7 and 5.8 to reflect this change. Okay. And what we've done in those paragraphs is firstly to indicate that a resource can provide both service potential and the capability to generate economic benefits. And in 5.8, we've linked the term service potential more clearly to a resource by simply referring to a resource in that paragraph. So if we could move on to the recommendations, they're listed on this slide. They're also in paragraph 2, that, as I've said, the description of service potential should be amended to replace references to capacity with capability. A conforming adjustment is that references to ability in paragraph 5.7 are changed to capability. And then we've got these further minor drafting changes, which I've just mentioned, to paragraph 5.7 and 5.8. So the issue is, does the IPSASB agree with these recommendations? And I've not here in conforming to the board instruction and the chair's summing up, I've not gone into this issue of the use of the term item in the context of a resource. So I prefer to avoid that until next meeting. Okay, thanks, Ian, and thanks, board.
Okay, so it's basically what we're looking at here is a binary choice. Having gone round terminology at the last meeting, the question is, which does the board prefer to move to the use of the term capability, or we retain the existing wording? I think those are the two choices. We shouldn't go round any other possible wording options, having had that discussion last time round. So does anybody disagree with the staff's proposal that we move to the term capability? Murray.
Thank you. I prefer the word service potential, because the government can make decisions on what kind of service they delivered and what level of service they delivered. And so the word service potential is suitable for the expression of that meaning. And so I prefer service potential. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Murray. Just for clarity, we're not proposing deleting the term service potential. We're just proposing changing in the definition, substituting capability for the term capacity in explaining it. Are you okay with that change?
Yes, I support the service potential, and because the government can make decisions on the basis of the demands of the citizens, and how they deliver the service on what level and what quantity and quality. And so I support the existing service potential. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Fine.
Camila?
Yes, I also support this change, but just for information, I think in the Spanish version there will not be change at the end. Both words are translated as capacidad, so that will not have any effect on the Spanish version of the handbook. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Camila. I think that was our suspicion, that actually this is probably an argument amongst the English speakers rather than perhaps something that would really give a major change in terms of translation. Renee.
Yes, hi, thank you. Are we going to have a BC on this to explain the reason for the change? When I looked back at the change and I saw ability being changed for capability, and I saw the use of ability, and so going to capability means that you need to do two changes instead of one, and it also suggests that ability was also problematic, not just capacity. So this is a thought process I had, and I looked up the different definitions in English of ability versus capability, and frankly, I thought maybe an easier change would have been to just go with ability, right? And that would have, but then again, I'm not fully, I don't think I have the full visibility on John, what we were trying to accomplish here. So right. I'm not suggesting we change it. I'm just sharing with you my thoughts and maybe explaining it in a BC, because it begs the question, why is ability not appropriate as well as a potential term? Thank you.
I mean, the board, thanks, Renee. The board proposal, the staff proposal at the last meeting was ability, but that was not supported, and the term capability was proposed as an alternative and seemed to attract considerable support. And I think that's been confirmed at this meeting. So that's a little bit of the background. Board looked at ability, didn't like it. Paragraph BC 5.8A does actually try and give a rationale for this. and I'll build on that.
Thanks, Renee. Any other comments? So just to round this off, I'd just like to take a show of hands for those that favour the change to capability and anyone that favours retaining capacity. So if I can just see hands raised in terms of those supporting the change to capability. Okay, and just to double check then, those that favour retaining capacity.
Ian, I counted 15 who favoured moving to capability.
Yeah. Can I just allow everybody to drop their hands, and then I'll just go for those on retaining capacity. So anybody who wishes to retain capacity in the definition, in the discussion of service potential.
No.
Okay, so I think that's conclusive then that we change to capability, and then there would be the consequentials in terms of the drafting as you outlined, John, as you recommend.
Yeah. So I can assume that the drafting given in paragraph 10 of the paper is supported as well.
I'm not seeing any hands raised on that. I think there's also the action just to clarify the BC explanation in response to Renee's point as well on that.
Yeah, I'll look again at paragraph 5.8a, BC 5.8a. Thank you.
Good. Okay. So in terms of the agenda, we've got further time on the conceptual framework limited scope update tomorrow. I think it's probably better that we don't start the item on assets today. I think what I'm going to propose is that we close the public session at that point today. Thank everyone for their contributions. And then once everybody has left the meeting with the exception of members and relevant staff members, then we will move into the private session to talk about sustainability reporting. And welcome everybody back then to the main session tomorrow. Ross, anything else I should say in terms of logistics at all?
No, Ian, other than we'll just give a few minutes for everyone else to exit the meeting before the private session begins.
Okay.
But we'll ask members to just stick around and wait a couple minutes for that to happen.
Just from me, thanks everybody for the decisions and instructions that you've provided this morning, for which I'm very grateful.
Yeah, thanks, John, for walking us through that. There was a lot in that session this morning.
Yeah. And apologies for some of the draft errors, in particular the one that Chris very accurately identified, but not the only one. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, John. So we'll see you back tomorrow, first thing tomorrow.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah. See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, Ross, I think we're...
No, just a moment, Ian. I'm just having some technical issues on my end with regards to the YouTube stream. So if you guys can just hold on a second.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thanks for
I'd
letting us know,
appreciate
Leah.
that.
Yeah. Okay. You're still struggling, Leah?
Please leave a message after the.
Yeah, I apologize, Ian. I did something and so if you could just give me a couple more minutes.
Yeah, I was just wondering, did you want us to sort of, do something like, or go out and come back in again or something?
Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put you guys in a breakout room.
Okay.